Imagine a place where, several times a year, people go blind and can't see beyond their own hands. A place where the sky turns orange, airplanes stop flying, and life comes to a standstill for days. This country exists. It's called Cape Verde. A nation that was supposed to cease to exist before it was even born, which today has more people living abroad than at home, with villages nestled inside active volcanoes. A country that almost no one could locate on a map, but that became famous overnight, thanks to a soccer team that people had to look up online. Sit back, open your eyes wide, and hit like, because in this new video from Uncensored World, we're traveling to Cape Verde, the strangest country in the world, where a phenomenon leaves its entire population blind. Let's get started. In the heart of the vast Atlantic Ocean, hundreds of kilometers off the coast of Africa, lie 10 islands born of volcanic eruptions, huge cliffs plunging straight into the sea, villages clinging to impossible slopes, white sand beaches stretching endlessly as far as the eye can see. At first glance, a paradise that very few people can locate on a map. A paradise called Cape Verde. Barely 500,000 people live scattered across these 10 islands. To give you an idea, that's fewer people than live in a single neighborhood of any major city. People scattered across a maritime territory so vast that traveling from one island to another can take several hours by boat. There are many things that don't add up in this country, even from the very first moment you hear its name. Cape Verde sounds like jungle, like thick vegetation, like endless greenery. Yet what you discover when you arrive here is exactly the opposite. Dry volcanic rock, arid soil, barely a handful of hardy plants clinging to the ground. The name doesn't describe these islands at all. It describes a cape off the coast of Senegal, on the mainland, hundreds of kilometers from here, which was the first thing Portuguese sailors saw in the 15th century. They named the cape they first discovered after its vegetation, but then islands that were never green ended up bearing this name forever. That contrast between what the name promises and what the land offers is even more striking on one of these islands. On Fogo, the highest island in the archipelago, stands a volcano nearly 3,000 meters high that remains active to this day. People live inside its crater, in a village called das Caldeiras. They are not just a handful of people passing through, but entire families who, generation after generation, have chosen to stay here, cultivating vineyards directly on volcanic ash, soil that turns out to be surprisingly fertile for grapes. From these vineyards comes a wine, named after the region itself, known simply as Chom wine. It's not a wine you'll find in just any supermarket around the world, but among wine lovers, it has a reputation of its own as a true rarity, one of the few wines on the planet grown inside the crater of an active volcano, at an altitude of more than 1,700 meters. A bottle typically costs between 10 and 20 euros, a price many consider a bargain for what it truly represents. Every sip comes from a land that could turn back into lava at any moment. This volcano is not merely a backdrop. In 1995, it erupted and buried part of the village under lava. They rebuilt it. In 2014, it erupted again, and this time the lava flow advanced so slowly and so visibly that the residents themselves were able to record on video how the volcano swallowed up their own homes, meter by meter, for weeks. And yet, when the lava cooled, the people returned once more, rebuilt once more, and continue to make wine on the very same land that just the day before had been a river of fire. That's why living here means accepting that your own home could disappear at any moment, without warning, and yet staying anyway. What about you? Would you live inside an active volcano? We'd love to hear from you in the comments. That same rugged, volcanic terrain explains why, for a very long time, absolutely no one lived in this country. Before the first Portuguese ship arrived in the 15th century, these islands were completely empty. Not a single village, not a single person. And that initial emptiness didn't disappear entirely over the centuries. Of the 10 islands that make up the archipelago, there is one that remains uninhabited to this day, by law, Santa Lucia. In the 18th century, some shepherds tried to settle there with their goats, but the total lack of water forced them to leave shortly thereafter, and no one has lived there since. Today it has been designated a strict nature reserve, and the government itself prohibits tourism along its shores. Only a handful of scientists, transported by fishing boats, are permitted to set foot on it, with the sole purpose of protecting the seabirds and turtles that nest there without being disturbed. It's a curious sight. A country that today has more people living abroad than within its borders simultaneously keeps one of its 10 islands completely empty by its own choice. Almost as if Cape Verde had decided to preserve a piece of itself exactly as it was before the first Portuguese ship arrived. Unlike almost any other country on the planet, Cape Verde does not have its own indigenous people. It was born directly from the mixing of the colonists who arrived and the enslaved people they brought with them from the African continent. From that mixing, starting from scratch, something emerged that had not existed anywhere else in the world until then. The first Creole culture, with its own language born right here, Criollo. Today, virtually the entire population speaks it as their mother tongue, at home, on the street, and at the market. And yet, if you look for the country's official language, the one listed on official documents, you'll find Portuguese. The language that people actually use, the one that truly identifies them as Cape Verdeans, has no official status in their own country. Cape Verde's first capital, Cidade Velha, very quickly became one of the major hubs for the slave trade across the Atlantic. This put it on the radar of the most feared pirates of the time. Francis Drake, the English privateer who terrorized even the Spanish crown itself, attacked and sacked the city. The French pirate Jacques de Sores did the same shortly thereafter. The attacks were so frequent that the Portuguese authorities, exhausted, eventually abandoned that coast entirely and founded a new, more protected capital in 1770, present-day Praia, which remains the capital to this day. But even after surviving the pirates, Cape Verde still faced its most difficult test of all, continuing to exist as a nation in its own right. When it gained independence from Portugal in 1975, the actual plan was not to become a separate nation, but to merge permanently with Guinea-Bissau on the mainland under a single national project. A sudden shift in power on the other side of the ocean shattered that union forever, leaving these 10 islands alone in the middle of the Atlantic, forced to fend for themselves overnight. For all these reasons, Cape Verde, as it exists today, is largely the result of a plan that was never fully realized. Few people know that Charles Darwin himself began here, on the island of Santiago, the first scientific stop on his voyage aboard the Beagle in 1832. 3 weeks of walking on this very volcanic rock were enough for him to begin shaping the observations that would later change biology forever. With a country born of cultural mixing, it's no surprise that many of its people end up seeking their place elsewhere. Cape Verde suffered such extreme droughts throughout the 20th century that they triggered a massive exodus of its population. Today, the figure is almost unbelievable. There are more Cape Verdeans living in the United States, Europe, and South America than there are Cape Verdeans living in Cape Verde. Many entire families are only reunited once a year, when someone returns for a visit laden with money, gifts, and news of a life the rest can only imagine from afar. If this has already surprised you, hit like now, because what's coming next is even more striking. That constant distance between those who left and those who stayed has even shaped the way people interact in their daily lives. In Cape Verde, eating in public without offering some of your food to the person next to you is considered a serious breach of etiquette. It's not just a simple gesture of courtesy. The custom stems directly from times of famine, when sharing what little there was literally a matter of survival. That custom has survived for generations after the famine ended. The pace of life changes radically, depending on which island you're on. In Brava, one of the smallest and most isolated islands in the archipelago, there isn't a single traffic light. There are no major intersections, no rush, And none of that urban stress that currently dominates any big city. The locals themselves sum up their way of life in 2 words they repeat constantly: no stress. Walking through Brava is like stepping back in time to a European village from another century. Transported in its entirety to the tropics. No cars, no noise, no one watching the clock. The landscape also has its own everyday oddity, much smaller but just as curious. When Portuguese settlers brought goats to the archipelago in the 15th century, the animals adapted so well to the arid volcanic terrain that they multiplied unchecked for centuries. Today, walking across any island means constantly coming across goats. There is, literally, 1 goat for every 2 people in the country. They're as much a part of the landscape as the volcanic rocks themselves. And despite all these difficulties, the drought, mass emigration, and an economy that depends largely on remittances from those who left, Cape Verde boasts a statistic that surprises anyone familiar with the region. More than 85% of its population is literate, one of the highest rates on the entire African continent. A small, isolated, arid country scattered in the middle of the ocean has achieved something that many countries with far greater resources have failed to do. Would you prefer to live outside your home country? If so, where would you choose to live? Tell us in the comments. That very habit of looking outward, of always having 1 foot in another part of the world, is exactly what explains why all of a sudden, this small archipelago that had gone unnoticed for centuries ended up on everyone's lips across half the planet. Cape Verde doesn't have a strong soccer league. It doesn't have large stadiums or youth academies like those boasted by other countries. So when its federation set out to put together a competitive national team, it had to do something no other country had done on this scale: scour the internet. Soccer databases, social media, digital family trees, searching all over Europe for any player in the 2nd division, 3rd division, or amateur leagues who had a father, mother, or grandparent born on these islands. A national team built, literally, through internet searches, uniting under the same flag soccer players who had grown up in the Netherlands, Ireland, and Portugal, without ever having set foot in Cape Verde in their entire lives. With that improvised team, they arrived at the World Cup as the weakest opponent in the entire tournament, representing a country of barely 500,000 people. They were drawn into a group with Spain and Uruguay, 2 historic powerhouses of world soccer. The logical outcome would have been to return home after being routed in the first round. Instead, they achieved something no one expected: a 0-0 draw against Spain and a 2-2 draw against Uruguay, finishing the group stage undefeated, without losing a single match. In the round of 16, they faced Leo Messi's Argentina, the reigning world champion. They took the match to the absolute limit, a 2-2 tie after 90 minutes of regulation time, holding their own against one of the best teams on the planet. Their elimination came in extra time, in the cruelest way possible, but that didn't stop the whole world from taking notice of them. And if there's one face that sums up how a handful of virtually unknown soccer players managed to steal the spotlight from the stars of world soccer, it's that of their goalkeeper and captain Vozinha. At 40 years old and playing in a Slovak league that practically no one outside his country follows, Vozinha began the World Cup as a complete unknown, with barely 50,000 followers on Instagram. After a series of saves that left the Spanish forwards with no chance, something exploded online. Content creators, fans, and media outlets from around the world began sharing his saves over and over again, and his account began to grow at a rate even he couldn't explain. The end result is hard to believe. Vozinha's account surpassed 28 million followers, leaving behind names like Thibaut Courtois, Iker Casillas, and even Emiliano Martinez himself, some of the most renowned goalkeepers in recent soccer history. Before we continue our journey through the rest of Cape Verde, if you haven't subscribed to Uncensored World yet, now is a good time to do so, because on this channel we'll keep bringing you stories like this one. Stories that no mainstream media outlet will cover in this level of detail. A country that most people wouldn't be able to point out on a map suddenly, overnight, became more searched for online than nations with 100 times its population. But the strangest thing about Cape Verde has nothing to do with soccer. It has to do with something happening in its own sky. Cape Verde lies in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, more than 600 kilometers from the nearest African coast. And yet several times a year, the Sahara Desert manages to reach all the way here. The phenomenon is called bruma seca, and it occurs mainly between January and April. The trade winds literally pick up tons of sand and dust from the heart of the Sahara and carry them hundreds of kilometers across the ocean. Scientists studying this phenomenon estimate that every year, the Sahara sends more than 100 million metric tons of dust into the air toward the Atlantic. It's such an enormous amount that, if you could gather it all up and weigh it at once, it would exceed the weight of tens of thousands of fully loaded airplanes, all floating in the sky at the same time. Cape Verde, being on the front line of that route, receives a portion of it directly overhead. When the cloud arrives, the change is immediate. The sky turns a dense, almost unreal orange, as if someone had placed a filter over the sun. Visibility can drop to less than 1 kilometer, and during the most intense episodes to just a few meters. Walking down the street at that moment means you can't clearly make out what's just a few steps away. From space, satellites capture images of the entire cloud crossing the ocean as if it were a solid, earth-colored patch floating on the blue water. The effects aren't just visual. The amount of fine particles suspended in the air triggers respiratory problems. Anyone with asthma or allergies notices it immediately, with a sore throat and difficulty breathing normally. Many residents simply choose to stay home, with doors and windows closed, waiting for the cloud to pass. Sal International Airport, one of the archipelago's most important airports and a major entry point for much of the tourism, is forced to cancel all flights for the duration of the episode, as no pilot can fly in such poor visibility. The boats that connect the various islands are also stranded in port, and during those days, Cape Verde is practically cut off from the rest of the world, not because of any conflict or crisis, but because of a dust cloud that has crossed an entire ocean to reach this place. What is most striking is the sheer scale of this phenomenon. The same cloud that blinds Cape Verde does not stop at these islands. It continues traveling across the Atlantic, and during the most intense episodes, crosses the entire ocean, reaching the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and even the southern United States, weeks after leaving the African desert. In Europe, that same Saharan sand is responsible for a phenomenon that many people have witnessed without knowing its origin: the rains that leave cars covered in reddish mud, known as blood rain or mud rain, which are nothing more than Saharan dust mixed with rainwater. And, in an almost poetic twist, that same dust that blinds Cape Verde ends up, upon reaching the other side of the ocean, becoming one of the natural fertilizers that nourish the Amazon. It contains phosphorus and minerals that the rainforest needs, and that the Amazonian soil itself cannot replenish on its own. Cape Verde, without intending to, has become the first stop for a phenomenon that later makes headlines across half the planet, with almost no one realizing that it all began here. Do you know of any phenomena like this in your country? Or what's the strangest thing that happens where you live? Tell us about it in the comments. And the dry mist isn't the only oddity hidden in the volcanic terrain of these islands. On the island of Sal lies the Pedra de Lume crater, an ancient extinct volcano whose crater, over the centuries, filled with seawater. That water became trapped inside, gradually evaporating under the sun for generations, until it concentrated such an extreme amount of salt that today it even exceeds that of the Dead Sea itself. The result is that anyone who steps into this lake automatically floats, without swimming, without exerting any effort, simply lying on the surface as if the water were denser than their own body. It is, in a way, yet another way in which Cape Verde's nature forces you to surrender to it. First, a desert that blinds you, and now a crater that won't even let you sink. But not everything in Cape Verde has to do with arid extremes or phenomena that put the body to the test. Between February and May, the waters surrounding the island of Boa Vista fill with humpback whales that travel hundreds of kilometers from the North Atlantic just to mate and give birth in its warm waters. During those months, you need only dive a little below the surface to clearly hear the underwater songs of the males searching for mates in the open ocean. It is perhaps the only time of year when Cape Verde ceases to astonish with the harshness of its natural environment and instead surprises with just how beautiful it can be. With so many people having left to work abroad, the way children are raised in Cape Verde has changed completely. In countless homes, it is not the parents but the grandparents who actually raise the children day to day. The parents work in Lisbon, Boston, or Rotterdam. They send money every month so the family can get by, and they can only return for a visit once a year, when their work allows it. The children grow up loving their parents mostly through a screen, via video calls. And yet, when the day of their reunion at the airport finally arrives, that embrace becomes one of the most recurring and moving scenes in the entire life of the islands. This custom of loving someone who lives far away, of feeling that a part of your family is always somewhere else in the world, even has its own word in Cape Verde, saudade. There is no exact equivalent in Spanish or any other closely related language. It is a blend of longing, gentle sadness, and affection for what is no longer close to you. From that very word springs the morna, the country's most important musical style, so vital to its culture that UNESCO itself has recognized it as part of the world's cultural heritage. The singer who brought the morna beyond the islands, Cesaria Evora, became famous around the globe for performing barefoot on stage, always singing songs about departing ships and people waiting at the harbor. Even today, the morna plays at every farewell at Cape Verde's airports and at every homecoming after months or years away from the island. And yet, despite all that underlying sadness, Cape Verde also knows how to celebrate like few other places in Africa. The Mindelo Carnival on the island of São Vicente has become one of the largest on the entire continent. And there's a very direct connection to everything we've just described. Much of that carnival came about thanks to the very people who had gone to live in Brazil and who, upon returning for a visit, brought back with them the rhythms, costumes, and traditions they had learned there. During those days in February, the very same streets that remain calm and unhurried the rest of the year fill with drums, high heels, colorful feathers, and entire dance troupes dancing until dawn, as if the entire country were suddenly releasing, for a few days, all the tension built up from the distance and the waiting throughout the rest of the year. Cape Verde is a country that achieves a great deal with very little, and this is evident in every corner of daily life. As you know, more than 85% of its people can read and write, a staggering figure compared to many of its neighboring countries in Africa. Yet this same country, to obtain something as basic as a glass of water, must desalinate seawater into drinking water every single day. As a volcanic archipelago with almost no rivers or natural freshwater sources, Cape Verde relies on large desalination plants that remove salt from ocean water so people can drink, cook, and shower. A very significant portion of the country's budget is spent simply on producing water that in most countries flows directly from the tap without anyone giving it a second thought. Farming isn't easy either. Volcanic soil can be fertile, as we saw with the vineyards on the volcano, but the lack of consistent rainfall means that any drought is a severe blow to families who make their living from farming or fishing. Many young people, upon finishing their studies, find very few job opportunities within the country and end up making the same decision as previous generations, to pack their bags and seek a new life abroad, even if that means leaving behind everything they know. And then there's the Fogo volcano, the very one we saw at the beginning of the video, with people living inside its crater. It's not just a pretty curiosity to show in a video, it's a real threat that remains very much alive today. The scientists monitoring the mountain day and night know that another eruption isn't a distant possibility, but merely a matter of time. Even so, the authorities haven't managed to convince the families of Chandas calderas to leave the crater for good. Every time the ground shakes a little more than usual, evacuation alerts are issued, alerts that many residents have already experienced more than once in their lives, knowing full well that As soon as the lava cools, many of them will climb back up to rebuild their homes and replant their vineyards in the very spot where their homes once burned. Given everything you already know about this country, this last fact makes much more sense than it seems at first glance. In the World Cup round of 32, Cape Verde faced Leo Messi's Argentina, the reigning world champions. No one outside the islands would have bet a single peso on them. And yet, over the course of the 90-minute match, the smallest team in the entire tournament achieved something that seemed impossible, holding a 2-2 draw against the best team on the planet, in front of millions of people watching the game on television around the world. The goal that tied the match came from a play no one expected, and it sparked a scene that went viral on social media. Players hugging each other in the center of the field, as if they had already won something much greater than a simple result. Vozinha, the same goalkeeper whom no one outside his Slovak league had heard of just months earlier, kept diving again and again to stop shots that looked like sure goals, prolonging the upset minute by minute. Elimination came in extra time and in the worst possible way. A ball that ricocheted and went into his own net in the 111th minute, when the match was almost over. Cape Verde ended up losing 3-2, but left the field to the applause of an entire stadium that, just a few hours before the match, didn't even know how to pronounce the name of their national team correctly. Perhaps that's why this story fits so well with everything else you've discovered in this video. A country that emerged practically out of nowhere, that was on the verge of disappearing before it even fully existed, where half the family is always thinking of those far away, and which, when the whole world finally turns its attention to it, decides to stand its ground until the very last second, even though in the end, once again, the result slips through its fingers just when it seemed to have everything under control. Cape Verde didn't need a desert, a volcano, or its own World Cup to get noticed. It was enough simply to exist, with all its uniqueness, for the world to finally turn its attention to these 10 islands in the middle of the Atlantic. And if this country, which should never have existed, has left you wanting more, the next journey takes you to a completely different place, one of the richest and most beautiful countries on the planet, which, despite all its wealth and beauty, is running out of children. Don't miss what's coming next, because what's about to disappear there is much harder to recover than any volcano or desert.